We knew from a journal account and from some other documents that several people had died on board LaBelle when it was anchored in Matagorda Bay in February 1686. So we knew there was a possibility of human remains being found. We didn't know if we would find any or what condition they would be in. And in fact, we found one completely intact human skeleton that was in a great state of preservation. Most notably, inside the cranium, there was probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of the brain tissue still preserved inside the cranium of this individual. So the human remains we found were quite unique in terms of the preservation condition that they existed in.
We brought the skull that was recovered from the LaSalle shipwreck up to the Scottish Rite Hospital for Children for a CAT scan. The purpose of the CAT scan is to get the digital imaging that will be able to recreate a reconstruction of the skull. From the skull, we'll be able to then take the tissue thicknesses and add clay to it and actually reconstruct the facial characteristics of this individual. This is just an example of the extent to which archaeologists go to put as much flesh on the bones that we excavated on the archaeological data.
And here we go.
Here's the preliminary image.
Perfect.
Science tells us a lot about archaeology and history. It provides the little tidbits of information. Each one unto itself is not particularly significant. When you add them all together, it just gives you much better insight, a better appreciation, a better feeling of the time period and the individuals that you're dealing with. So for archaeologists, we try to use every avenue of science available to us, from CAT scans to any sort of trace analysis, anything that will help us to get to know the individual better that we're working with.
I think that skeleton actually brought to life and made more personal the excavation of this particular ship. When you find a person, you start imagining if you were that person, what kinds of feelings and thoughts went through that individual's mind just before they died on board LaBelle, here in the New World with hostile Indians on shore and all the difficulties that LaSalle and his men were encountering. Those are the kinds of thoughts that I think the public really began to think about once they saw that we had the remains of a person on board the ship.
There is a significant amount of brain material still preserved within the cranium of the skull. So we're going to attempt to move it by using a specific gravity of the solution. The brain at the moment is saturated with a mixture of water and alcohol, and we're just going to put it into a new container and add a solution that has a lot more water in it, which is a heavier specific gravity, and that will cause the brain matter to simply float to the surface or to the opening of the foramen magnum. Oh, that actually, you can see the folds right here in this piece right there. You know, most people think that we're going to get a better DNA sample out of the brain, but the experts actually tell us that the DNA is going to be much better preserved in the bone than in the brain. We will still go ahead and run the DNA test on the brain, but we'll also be taking samples from the bone itself, and then we can compare the two. Sink to the bottom, and then we can just skim all this off.
Looking for clues from remains that are over 300 years old can be a daunting task. But for the archaeologists today, forensic technology can open doors that previously would have remained closed. With the technical data gathered from the CT scan, it is now possible to map a three-dimensional representation of the object. This precision data can be used to create an exact physical replica of the original skull.
Once a CT scan is performed on the skull, the CT slices will be read into our software system called Materialize software. This software processes the CT images into a three-dimensional file that is then sent by network to a stereolithography machine.
The stereolithography machine consists of an ultraviolet laser. And that laser traces along the surface of a light-sensitive resin, one layer at a time, each layer being 1/6000th of an inch in thickness. And each layer is added to the next until finally the model is generated in a complete piece.
Every detail of the resin copy matches the original skull recovered from LaSalle, including its muscle attachment scars and bone thickness, both of which are essential to an accurate facial reconstruction to a forensic anthropologist.